Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On College Football with us. Spencer, the entire idea for the Big 12 is how do we get to 20? How do we bring in more teams to make this league more profitable because of the look-in that Brett Yormark fought so hard for with the college football playoff? Let's reassess in a couple years and see the value of this league. To become more valuable, you need more power brands. Is there a legitimate possibility the Big 12 actually does pull ACC teams into this conference?
Well, if the ACC disbands, yes. I don't think the Big 12 is going to be able to pull ACC teams if only Florida State and Clemson leave. Yep. I think North Carolina is the key, and I've talked about this on my show. I think they are the key to the ACC's long-term viability. Yeah.
Clarification-wise, when you say disbands, does that mean those top three brands are gone? So the league itself, it still exists, but everybody knows, hey, we've got to look for a second option.
Yeah, I think what you could see is a Pac-12 style disruption. Yeah. If FSU and Clemson leave, that would be the equivalent of USC and UCLA making that move.
Yep.
There was still a plan. It didn't come to fruition. There was still a plan to have a league without them in it. And even without Colorado, it was going to be San Diego State as the 10th team. Then maybe they would have expanded further down the line. But that was the plan. I think the ACC can succeed in that plan if and only if they keep North Carolina around, because North Carolina has got legal ties to NC State. So they're essentially a package deal, is my understanding, is that you're not going to be able to pull North Carolina without bringing NC State along for the ride for what has been dubbed by, I forget who it was, the Wolfpack Backpack, which is pretty good. I think Miami is important too, but think about the state of North Carolina. If UNC is tied to NC State, you also have two other ACC schools in the state of North Carolina, and one of them is Duke. And look, there's a lot of craziness in realignment. The fact that Oregon and Maryland are in the same conference is wild. That is a wild concept in college athletics. There are still some things that have held to continue to be true. Oregon and Washington, USC, UCLA moved together. Oklahoma, Texas moved together. Can anyone actually see North Carolina and Duke not being in the same conference? Because I just can't. I cannot see that taking place. And that's, suspicion on my part. Maybe there'd be a legal way around it. But that means North Carolina could be worth up to three schools themselves, NC State and Duke as well. And then I don't know what would happen with Wake Forest, or if they're a big player. I don't think they really are in the ACC landscape. They have some Big 12 vibes to them over there in Wake Forest. But I think that if you keep North Carolina in the ACC, I think you could then keep Miami, you keep Duke, you keep NC State, and I think that league is good enough to continue. It's not as good as you'd like it to be if you're Jim Phillips, but it's good enough. So if that plan unfolds, I don't think there is a big incentive for Pitt or Louisville, who would be probably the top Big 12 targets and fits. I don't think there's a big incentive for them to leave the ACC for the Big 12. Now, maybe there'd be a financial renegotiation of the media rights contract without FSU and Clemson, and that would create a larger financial disparity, and they would consider it. But the money, correct me if I'm wrong here, Drake, is not going to be more going from the ACC to the Big 12. And the more teams you add, the more that payout from the conference gets diluted a bit, especially if they're not additive programs, which most, frankly, are not in college sports. So that's why I'm skeptical on the ACC teams getting there. If North Carolina leaves the ACC, though, if FSU and Clemson get out, North Carolina decides we want to do that too, and they take anybody else with them, then you could see NC State. You could see Louisville and Pitt go, all right, let's find a home, and then the whole thing could fall apart. But if North Carolina stays and you just lose FSU and Clemson, I think that league can continue.
A lot of it contingent, to me at least, on February 2025 when ESPN decides what they will do with the future of the conference past 2027. I think there are schools that will wait for that date past Florida State and Clemson, who already seem hell-bent on what they'll do to figure out their next move. Spencer, you mentioned a Louisville, a Pitt. What about Virginia Tech? Who else sits there? You say, you know what, you mentioned Wake Forest, like that Big 12 vibe.
Big 12 vibe. I mean, there's something about Syracuse and that orange dome.
Boy, you are not making anybody happy right now. Like, I'm looking for like the Virginia Tech or like maybe an NC State becomes a straggler, or
NC State. Like I'm mostly operating off of just kind of vibes here, but also, you know, who would be able to like geographically, they're all about the same.
Right.
But if you're talking, you know, the Big 12 and who suddenly fits in that conversation, what were we talking about with Brett Yormark earlier? That he's a guy that, you know, is willing to try stuff, wants to be a little bit new, wants to be a little bit stand out, cutting edge. I like Syracuse's dome. Like, if they could ever get good at football, they get a new head coach. They got Kyle McCord in at quarterback. If they ever got good, I think that could be kind of fun. I don't think they'd be at the top of the Big 12's wish list. I think Louisville and Pitt would be the top two schools, because Pitt, West Virginia being a game that gets played as a Big 12 conference game, I think that's too good to pass up. Like, that's one of the best rivalries in all of college sports, whether people are acutely aware. Certainly on this channel, they have to be aware of the backyard brawl and how utterly fantastic of a rivalry is. Like, that's a great encapsulation of why college football is great. Those are two programs that in my lifetime have not really sniffed national relevance consistently. There have been flashes, there have been moments, but they've overall been middling. But when those two teams play, it feels like the gosh darn Super Bowl, Drake. It feels like everything in the world is on the line in that game. So I think that'd be one. And then Louisville, geographically, is a little bit closer to the Big 12, and also, you know, historically, they have been really, really bad, but they have historically been a very good basketball team. And that is not something that they've succeeded at lately. However, we know that Brett Yormark enjoys a good basketball school. And Big 12 is the best basketball conference in the country. I was burned in my March Madness bracket for acting that way in making my selections. But you know what? No regrets, right? With the A on the neck and the tattoo, you know, everything like that. Yeah, none of that. So, yeah, I think Virginia Tech would be the next team that you'd like to pick up if you're the Big 12. Either Virginia Tech or NC State. You can make the argument either way. I mean, you know, you have to think about, if you're the Big 12, what are you looking for, right? I don't think the television numbers are that big, but I don't think there's much of a difference between Virginia Tech and NC State.
And they're not near as big as they are between Washington State, who is one of the biggest TV juggernauts that existed in the Pac-12. Like, shockingly good, better than most Big 12 schools, who are still off the table. So,
they pull the Seattle market more than I think a lot of people realize, and the Seattle television market is fairly sizable. Now, Oregon State, less so, because there are not as many people in Oregon, so you don't have as many television eyeballs there. But yeah, I mean, we were just talking ACC schools. If we want to talk the still technically existing Pac-12, like that's an entirely different conversation. But yeah, I think if you were going to go, you know, like Pitt also feels like a more logical travel partner with Louisville. I would think like that pairing would seem to work. But then your next two, probably NC State and Virginia Tech, based on the geography, the location, and the brand of those schools.
Love it. Up next, can the ACC poach the Big 12? That is a silly question that might not be so. This is Locked On Big 12.